let's move to our panel of experts now on federal and state health policy. Lengthy bios for each of these impressive folks are available in the conference app and on the website. Just a quick reminder, we've asked each to provide about 10 to 12 minutes of perspective, this theme that Norm left us with which is what can healthcare leaders be expecting from policymakers in the coming year. Our first panelist is Dean Rosen. Many of you probably know Dean. He's a longtime friend of the Forecast Conference and a partner at Melman, Castanetti, Rosen, and Thomas, so leading government relations firm in Washington, D.C. Dean, I see you have your camera on. Can you unmute yourself and share some of your thoughts on what's likely on the federal policy front in the coming year?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you again for inviting me, to the great folks at UCI and Mirage School. I always love hearing Norm's discussion, and we'll hope to be together with him and all of you next year. I'm also just delighted to be joining the panel today with Sonia and Hemi, who are just really also, really world-class experts and share different perspectives in different areas of expertise. So I'm going to sort of try to frame this, talk about where we are, specifically what the new sort of world order is bringing to healthcare stakeholders and providers, taking some of the themes that Norm outlined and articulated down to a little bit more granular level on some of the federal health policy changes. And then talking a little bit about the political outlook and how that might affect the agenda coming forward. So a couple things here. First, what we've seen is that for the last 2+ years, federal health policy really, as Norm said, has been dominated by the COVID landscape and the COVID response. And that has, in some cases, been bipartisan, in other cases not been bipartisan. Under President Trump, the Congress approved in a bipartisan way $4.5 trillion or so of COVID relief and spending. Norm touched on the $1.9 trillion bill that President Biden signed in March, which was it's kind of a Democrat-only bill. But there been a lot of funding that has been provided on a bipartisan basis. But those policies have often and also divided us. And I just note that before we got into the pandemic, we were all talking, a lot of us at the federal policy level, about the concerns around vaccine hesitancy from a racial and ethnic standpoint, given the really terrible history of Tuskegee and other things. I don't think any of us really envisioned that we would be in a place where the country was divided on mass vaccines treatment, not only on racial and ethnic grounds, but also geographic, education, and politics. But here's where we are. There will be, I think, some opportunities for bipartisan policy this year. I'll touch on some of those. And then we've seen a lot of change in the elections, and I think this next year will likely bring further change. And that's going to make things challenging, as I noted here. Again, big picture, and then I'll get into a little bit of granularity. But despite some of those incremental areas of agreement around mental health and some other things, I think hospitals, physicians, and other healthcare stakeholders face a growing kind of consumer backlash. We talk about the economics of inflation, but cost consolidation, consumer protections, we've seen that in the surprise billing legislation. We've seen it in price transparency. We've seen it in the push for greater interoperability and individual ownership. I think that's going to continue. We'll also see greater scrutiny, I think, over the money that's been spent, the $6 trillion plus on COVID, and the fact that some institutions are doing quite well while there are great pockets of the country that are not. And I think Norm mentioned this, but I agree, which is I hear a lot from policymakers every day that we've got to start adjusting, we as healthcare stakeholders, to kind of this new normal of the government not infusing new dollars at every crisis, but we've got to learn to kind of live with it. And what impact that has on how much federal spending and relief there will be in the future will be clear. I mentioned this sort of mistrust of public health officials and institutions. This is true across the board, by the way, whether it's religious institutions, the healthcare system, or government, military or other. Everything really media is trending downward, but our public health officials and public health have really taken a beating in the last couple of years. And then I think the hardest thing that I hear every day, Christoph and others, and I'll be interested in Hammy and Sonia's comments too, is that representing a wide range of healthcare stakeholders, I think almost everyone wants incremental positive change. What they hear from politicians is the House is either going to be controlled by Democrats dominated by the progressive or liberal wing of the party, and they want radical change in one direction, or controlled by Republicans, and they want radical change in another. And it's very hard to adjust. I think that will continue, and I'll touch on that in a couple of slides here. So first, I'm not going to go into all the details. You all have my slides, and happy to answer any questions as we get into the panel on it. But a lot of times we say we didn't get relief, but providers did get significant relief in December. Relief from Medicare across the board sequester cuts that will be phased out, but at least some relief for the first part of the year. The $1.9 trillion relief bill that I talked about wasn't paid for. So under what they call the pay-as-you-go scorecard, those would be automatic cuts to Medicare, healthcare providers, farmers and others, and Congress eliminated those for a year. They also delayed some cuts to clinical labs and specifically physicians. So that's how we ended last year and started this year. Let me get a little more granular on some of the things I think we can see here healthcare wise. And I've got a lot of these as questions. Will the Democrats rescue the $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion Build Back Better bill? I'm not sure. They really want to. They haven't been at the negotiating table. They're going to need every Democratic vote in the Senate. It's passed the House. It's going to have to go under radical change. President Biden and Joe Manchin, sort of the Democrat who's really been kind of holding it up and negotiating with a very different view, have not really negotiated. And we've got to get federal spending bills and other things done first. So that's a question, but there is a lot of additional healthcare relief in there: drug pricing reform, adding hearing coverage to traditional Medicare, an extension of the Affordable Care Act, expansions that were included in some of the past COVID relief bills, making those permanent, Medicaid expansions, support for home and community-based care. And again, that's going to have to be all Democrats. And right now, Senator Lujan is out of commission because he had a stroke, and there used to be a 50-50 Senate. Now it's effectively almost a Republican control in some ways, that they can only bring non-controversial bills to the floor. So we will see. There is some bipartisan interest as part of COVID relief in funding and sort of decoupling from the public health emergency, which provided a lot of flexibility for waivers of hospital at home care and new care delivery and telehealth. There is bipartisan support in Congress for decoupling those and extending those waivers for a year or two from the public health emergency. Really, whether they can do it now in the next couple of weeks here, they're talking about attaching it to the spending bill, which has to pass by March. It will depend on how much money there is and how much bipartisan support to pay for it there is. Right now, the parties are fighting over which so-called offsets they'll use or how to pay for it. There's also a question as to whether there will be more COVID relief for hospitals and physicians in that bill, further sequester relief. Right now, my betting is no, but Sonia may have a different view, and Hammy, and we'll see. There's also some things that I think will be bipartisan. Norm mentioned mental health. We've seen a lot of activity around child mental health and hearings kicking off in all the major health committees. We also know this year that there's several must-pass FDA user fee bills where industry agrees to pay fees, hire more FDA reviewers. They have to meet certain timelines. So drugs, devices, animal drugs, et cetera, biosimilars will all have to be reauthorized this year. And then there's a lot of interest in this, driven by the Senate in particular. Patty Murray of Washington State, a Democrat, and Richard Burr, Republican of North Carolina, are looking to do reforms that look forward. And when I left Congress 15 plus years ago in the aftermath of the 9/11 and the anthrax attacks, it's very clear that our response capabilities at the federal level are very backward looking, and were really drafted at a time when we were thinking about a dirty bomb in a couple of cities at a time, not really a national or global pandemic. So there'll be a lot of interest and I think opportunity to update those. Many of these are questions, but I think many of these could get done. I'm just going to conclude here with a couple of notes of politics, and take my final sort of minute and a half here, or 2 minutes, not sort of doing it as much justice as we did with Norm, but really sort of bringing it down to, again, kind of what it means for healthcare stakeholders. And I've talked about this before when I've been with you live, but I think this is one of the reasons that I think hospitals, doctors, patients, health plans, nearly everyone in the system is feeling so whipsawed. So these are the elections, the 10 elections in the 2 decades between 1960 and 1980. And what you saw is 3 of those elections were what they call change elections. The House, the Senate, or the presidency changed. You then go to the next couple of decades, the election beginning in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. In those 10 elections, we had 4 change elections. Again, presidency, House, or Senate changed. You look at the last decade plus, and nearly every election, with the exception of 2, has been a change election. And we're, as I said, very likely to have another one. How do we know that? The president, as Norm said, is facing enormous headwinds on Afghanistan, on crime, on inflation, on pocketbook issues. But even in the best of times, since 1946, there's only been 2 elections, 1998 and Bill Clinton in the midterms, and George W. Bush after the midterms under relatively kind of extraordinary circumstances. 98, where many Americans felt that Republicans in the House overreached on impeachment, and 2002, when the country was uniquely united, as Norm mentioned in his talk, after 9/11. But every other race historically, and you can see the 63 seats that President Obama lost in the wake of trying to do healthcare reform, that's never easy. And the Republicans need 5 seats to flip, and there's already been 30 Democratic retirements. I think most observers think that half of those seats, those 30 seats, most of them moderate, will go to Republicans. So does not look good in the House for Democrats. In the Senate, it's a different picture, and Norm mentioned this, but history's on the Republican side. If you look at the change elections again since 1946 and the performance, there have been more Senate victories than House victories for sure, but only 4 of them where the party in power has picked up seats. So that favors historically the Republicans. But again, when you look at the retirements in key states that are really transitional states, like Pennsylvania, where Senator Toomey's retiring, North Carolina, where Richard Burr's retiring, geography in some ways almost favors the Democrats. And this is, I think, where this fight between Donald Trump sort of wing of the party and the traditional kind of conservative wing of the party really plays out in these Senate primaries. So we will see, but I think one way or another, we're going to have divided government. And I'm not going to go into this slide, but already Republicans are starting to think about what they would do in the House. And they've set up these task forces on energy, climate, security, tech, and healthcare, chaired by Brett Guthrie, who I think is a very thoughtful member, and the ranking Republican in the Energy and Commerce Committee on Healthcare. So with that, I will close. I will stop sharing my slides, and I'll look forward very much to the comments of my colleagues and to being with you for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dean. I really appreciate your perspective.